Okay, welcome everybody. So we will begin, and as I was just saying, for today's class, you'll need a yoga strap, and you'll also need a rolled blanket at some point here. So yeah, let's take a comfortable seat and get into your practice. I'm really glad to see you. When you take a seat this morning, if you're sitting cross-legged or sitting on a chair, I'm going to ask you to focus on a kind of tripod base so that when you're sitting, let me do it like this. You do have your knees out if you're sitting cross-legged. If you're sitting on a physio ball, which is what I'm doing, you can have the knees out. If you're on a chair, you can do the same. If you're sitting in Virabhadrasana or Zazen, because that's better for your hips and knees, don't take the knees apart. It's uncomfortable to kneel like that. That won't be so purposeful for us. But I would like you, those of you who can, to take a tripod seat. And then you can rest your hands out over your knees. And you're welcome to close your eyes. Let your attention come inside. Come into the fabric of your body. Come into the rhythm of your breath. And you might notice this every time you practice, that actually to come inside to begin also means to temporarily set aside that which would be distracting, that which would pull you away from the purpose of your practice. Well, since part of the purpose of our practice is renewal, but another part is how to put wisdom into action, what we set aside in terms of that which would be distracting, you have to consider what pulls you away from the purpose of renewal, or what pulls you away from your capacity to put wisdom into action. And then let yourself come into the interior of your body, the rhythm of your breath, the refinement of your senses, not scattered about the world, but coming in here. And then even more internal, to the place where you know this deepest wisdom. Sometimes we touch it because we become renewed, and the wisdom is waiting for us to come back home. And when you sense yourself returning, like layer by layer, coming in, coming in, coming in, and then touching that wisdom, which is magnetically pulling you back home, you might discover that when you touch that wisdom, it actually causes this internal expansion where you're connecting to wisdom that is greater than your own. In some theories, they call this collective consciousness or universal wisdom. And it can be hard to sense that expansive wisdom if we're preoccupied with issues of survival or issues of depletion or overwhelm. We really come in to how your practice renews, recalibrates, and then lets you return to putting wisdom into action. And you can begin the Ujjayi breath. So there's this gentle whispering quality. And you'll hear that whispering with your inner ear. So our ability to cultivate the Ujjayi sound, particularly in the subtle form of the sound, and our ability to concentrate on that, those are kind of reflections of our capacity today. Where is our mental capacity? And our concentration need not feel like ferocious or overbearing, but nor would it be too lenient or too lax. So you have this kind of baby bear, mama bear, papa bear, baby bear, the just right amount of effort and elegance and capacity. Do 3 more breath cycles where you can sense the subtle sound of the Ujjayi that you hear as a whispering in your inner ear. And for every breath, you have this opportunity to be present in the entire duration of the breath. You also have the opportunity to start again and again, returning your attention to that intention. And then please bring your hands together at your heart in Anjali Mudra. And we'll chant Asatoma Sadgamaya. May we have the capacity to discern the real from the unreal, the true from the untrue, the finite from the infinite. May we know the difference between that which causes us to be darkness itself, ignorance, forgetfulness, and that which brings us to luminosity, to wisdom. We can chant together. Om Asatoma Sadgamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Om Asatoma Sadgamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Om Asatoma Sadgamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Shri Guru Pyo Namaha Hari Om. You may bow your head to your heart and release your hands. Please open your eyes. So this afternoon, I'm going to be focusing on the first and second chakra in this class. And I want to make a little sort of declaration before I do it. And that is that the chakra system, the 7 chakra system that we know, we go through stages of development in life. And the earliest stage of development at the first chakra is really our preoccupation without any consciousness about it at all. We don't have that kind of brain when we're born. It's a preoccupation with safety, of just like the basic biological needs getting met. And we are born completely dependent on others for doing that. But as we grow through life, another stage of development in relationship to the first chakra is this inherent tribal sense that we belong to the family of humanity and that the welfare of our society is dependent upon us. That we move into the role where we are the ones capable of providing that care. Whereas we're born dependent upon that care because we can't do things for ourselves in the stage of infancy, we grow into a sense of responsibility for that kind of care for the whole society, for our family of humanity. Sometimes we say for the welfare of all beings. So I'm going to focus our practice in the first chakra this afternoon. And I just invite you to see how it feels, what unfolds for you, and particularly be curious about how will the experience of Savasana and meditation be at the end of this practice. So if you would, please have your rolled blanket, and I'm going to move back to my other mat so Susie can take the phone camera, please. So with your rolled blanket, I would like you to step up on it with your toes. I guess Susie will move it in a moment. Oh, I see, thank you. Thanks. Okay, great. So step up onto the blanket with your toes and then come down to Uttanasana. And this is just to get like an appetizer, right? Here you are checking out what's it like today. So when you come forward and down, it's appropriate to use blocks if you need them to reach the floor. You can relax the weight of your head. So with your toes up on the blanket, and you've got like the front part of your arch on the blanket also, keep your heels ground on the floor and just take several breath cycles, several deep breath cycles. And let yourself really notice that, if there's a sense of shock, like those are your calf muscles, that's what's happening now in your calf muscles. Also notice when you stepped up onto the blanket, did you lean your hips back behind the plumb line? Like, are your hips, if there were a vertical line from your heels, are your hips behind that plumb line? And what happens if you come forward into that plumb line? And then just to explore, press into all 10 toes and rise up so you're going to tippy toe on the blanket. And then exhale and slowly release your heels back down towards the floor and do it slowly enough that you can sense how your body does. Place your heels. Now put your awareness on the pelvic floor. That's between your tailbone, your sitting bones, your pubic bones. And do the same thing that we just did. First, raise slowly up on your toes. So you have a little bit of a balance process going on here. And then go slowly down and notice when you're releasing your heels towards the floor that the process of slow will require some tone at your pelvic floor, your sitting bones, the deep low belly. Touch your heels down, press your toes down. So your toes are pressing down on the blanket itself. Now shift your hands to your hips. And as you rise up to standing, see if you can stand vertically. So I know you've got your toes on the blanket. Can you bring your hips forward enough to stand so you're really upright? Good. And then step over the blanket so you're going to put your heels on it. And you can put the feet hip distance apart. Bend your knees and come down to squat. And I know that not everybody can squat all the way because of how your knees bend or don't. So please feel free to put a couple blocks under your hips. Otherwise, as you come down to squat, try to keep your feet parallel. Reach your arms over your knees or past them. And allow the breath to come down low into your pelvis, your pelvic floor, your sitting bones. And now we're going to tip this forward into Uttanasana. So press into your heels, bring your fingertips to the floor, And press into Uttanasana. Take notice what it feels like at the pelvic floor and your deep low belly. And when you exhale, come down slowly, returning to your squat. Reach your arms forward. Okay. Inhale to go to Uttanasana with your heels on the blanket. Now exhale, blow out through the lips like a tiny straw and come down to your squat. Once more, inhale through your nose, straighten your legs slowly. So you're going to time that with the length of your inhale. Now when you blow out through a tiny straw for the exhale, it's going to take you a lot longer to exhale. So use the full length of the exhale to come down to your squat with your arms forward, past your knees. And then scoot yourself just forward of your blanket and put the soles of the feet together. Sit on your blanket. So this is called Baddha Konasana. So these three positions, we're going to check them out right now. This one, when you come to Baddha Konasana, you put the soles of the feet together, the knees go out to the side. You can hold your toes, if you like, with your fingers, raise up through your heart. Press the knees out to the sides of your room. And bring your attention down to the pelvic floor again. And try to sense where the inhale is welcomed into your pelvis and where it may feel challenged. And you can bring your torso very slightly forward. You don't have to go that far forward. Just tip your pelvis to bring your torso forward. So don't bring your chin to guide your torso forward. Use your pelvis. And when you come forward like this, notice where the breath is in your pelvic floor. I'm going to start getting specific now because I want you to notice this, and we'll take it throughout the course of the class. So in this position, notice if the breath might be a little bit more in the front hemisphere of the pelvic floor or a little bit more in the back hemisphere. And you can notice the difference between inhale and exhale. So right now I'm just asking you to notice if the inhale or exhale are more expressive in the front or back of the pelvic floor. The purpose of noticing is so that we can then use what we learn about ourselves to improve our circumstances in the body. Now with whatever you notice there, I'm going to ask you to roll up to sitting. Make like a little mental note of that, please. And then bring your knees up to center. And set your blanket aside. And take a block you may be not going to like me very much for this, but take a block to kneel on with the block in this position. So when you kneel on your block, and some of you know about this practice with me, I'm kind of fond of it. When you kneel on this block, I would like you to have yourself far enough forward on the block that your pubic bone won't touch the block when you tip the sitting bones forward. It's not like you're going to run into the block that way. Okay? And when you roll backwards, you can feel the tailbone and the sacrum touching the block. Okay, there you are. Come to center. Good. Alrighty, so bring your attention down and try to sense the breath filling out this shape. The shape looks like this. I'm just making an example of your pelvic floor. So the breath is going to fill out the shape of the pelvic floor, left hemisphere, right hemisphere, back hemisphere, and front hemisphere. Just invite that to be the possibility. Of course, you're going to notice where it doesn't work so well and the places where it does. And when you exhale, roll your tailbone slightly forward. roll your pelvis slightly back. Yes, you are touching the sitting bones at the inner edge and it might be tender. This is called a posterior tilt. Then inhale and roll forward. Take your sitting bones down. Let the pubic bone tip slightly forward. Lengthen your tailbone back. This is called an anterior tilt. And I'm going to ask you to go between the two. It's okay to close your eyes if that makes your concentration better. And start noticing when you're breathing in, when you're breathing out. What is the influence of the breath? Front hemisphere and back hemisphere of the pelvic floor. And left hemisphere to right hemisphere. And do that one more time, please. And then come into table pose, making a note of your experiences there. Shift to table pose. We will be coming back to that block, so don't bid it farewell. In table pose, I'm going to ask you now to try something on that you can explore, and then you can tell me later you liked it or you didn't like it or you got confused and whatnot. So in table pose, let's call this neutral. And when you inhale, I'm going to ask you to go to cat pose and broaden the back of your body. And when you exhale, come to cow pose and open the front hemisphere of your body. Now notice the pelvic floor. When you inhale to go into your cat pose, and the pelvic floor when you exhale to come into your cow pose. One more time, inhale to cat. Notice the influence on your pelvic floor. And exhale to cow pose, noticing the experience at the level of your pelvic floor. And then come to table pose. So for any one of us who lives with some sort of consistency of anxiety or apprehension or trepidation, mental distraction, the emotions on the spectrum of fear, we have a hypothesis in yoga that the pelvic floor is also involved. So I'm going to ask you to consider this exploration. We're going to continue with it. Consider it to be for physical and mental health. So now I'd like you to come to cow pose. Lift your sitting bones and your tailbone. We're going to stay in cow pose for several breath cycles. Bring your heart forward. Open your throat. And focus on the exhale to see if you're able to tone the front hemisphere of your pelvic floor during the exhale. So that's the place between your two sitting bones and your pubic bone. And that tone ought to also then come towards your deep low belly and upwards even towards your belly button. So inhale to the entire pelvic floor. But exhale in the front hemisphere of the pelvic floor. Release the exhale of the pelvic floor slowly. So the inhale is not like a sudden expansion of the pelvic floor, it's gradual. Last time, exhale, starting at the front hemisphere of your pelvic floor. And then begin with your tailbone and transition to cat pose.
like a parachute for the back body. And now in cat pose, during the inhale, I'm going to ask you to inhale towards the back hemisphere of the pelvic floor without letting cat pose really change shape. And then exhale from the front hemisphere of your pelvic floor. Inhale to the back hemisphere of the pelvic floor. And exhale from the front hemisphere. One more time. And then take your friendly block to sit on one more time in Virabhadrasana. I mean, your block is neither friendly nor unfriendly, it's just a yoga block, but let's picture it as being friendly. And the two sitting bones go to the outer edges of the block. Place your hands on your hips. Tip forward to the cow pose tilt. So this is called an anterior tilt. Breathe in to the whole experience of the pelvic floor. When you exhale, start toning the front hemisphere of your pelvic floor to roll your spine to neutral. Then inhale, roll forward to the anterior tilt. Breathe into the whole pelvic floor. And exhale, tone the front hemisphere of your pelvic floor to roll your spine to neutral. Really, your pelvis comes to neutral. The spine goes up from there. Once more, please. And exhale, tone the front hemisphere of your pelvic floor. Roll your pelvis to neutral. Rest your hands in your lap and see if you can sit upright in the center of your sitting bones right there. It's possible that your mind could get really still right inside this experience. Don't let yourself go to boredom or distraction if possible. Stay present. If your pelvic floor has been dysregulated in daily life, it's like a consistent leak, an exhaustion to your fuel tank. We can stay upright in this position where the two sitting bones, the pelvis is neutral. Can you rest in the quiet? Now place your hands on your hips and inhale to the entire realm of the pelvic floor. And exhale, roll your tailbone forward. So you're rolling posterior tilt, like a cat pose tilt. Begin the inhale at the back hemisphere of the pelvic floor to bring yourself upright. And then exhale, roll your tailbone down, posterior tilt. So the tailbone glides towards your pubic bone. Notice the tone of the belly. Inhale to the back hemisphere of the pelvic floor as you roll yourself just up to neutral. Once more, exhale, posterior tilt. And inhale to the back of the pelvic floor, just to bring your torso upright. Come only to the center of the pelvis and then rest your hands in your lap again. Notice the possibility of some mental quiet. And sometimes when you get that sweet spot, sort of just right spot with the pelvic floor here, there is an internal sense of the meditative channel. Now I'd like you to bring your palms forward on your mat, step your feet back, and reach into downward facing dog pose. You can put your block aside. And in downward dog pose, let's hold the dog pose relatively steady, but with your inhale, breathe into the back hemisphere of the pelvic floor. And with your exhale, exhale from the front hemisphere of the pelvic floor. Now, it's not that your pelvis is actually moving all that much, in fact, perhaps even imperceptible movement, but let the inhale prioritize the back of the pelvic floor. And on the exhale, you can prioritize the front hemisphere of your pelvic floor. This is a really helpful opportunity to notice how you make the transitions between the top of your inhale and the bottom of your exhale, and how you're transitioning pelvic floor muscles as well. Now walk your feet halfway up to your hands and take a wide stance in Prasarita Padottanasana. This does change the shape of the pelvic floor, but we're going to use the same assignment now. So you're going to inhale to the back hemisphere of the pelvic floor and exhale from the front hemisphere. Put your entire concentration into the effort, but make your concentration loving and curious. With the inhale to the back hemisphere of the pelvic floor, between your sitting bones and your tailbone. A slow expansion of the breath. Then the exhale from the front hemisphere, from your pubic bones to your sitting bones. Also a slow but consistent toning of the pelvic floor there. And then walk your hands back towards your hips. Please rise up to standing. And keeping your left foot kind of parallel to the mat. Just take the heel slightly out. Turn your right toes to your right. And come down to warrior two. So bend your right knee. There you go. And you can take your gaze to your right, but nothing particular to look at. You can also keep your gaze inward. And though you're now upright, I'm going to have you keep your attention at the pelvic floor. So in this position, when you inhale, try to imagine that you're widening the right hemisphere of the pelvic floor, like from the center line of the pelvic floor to your right sitting bone into your right knee.
And when you exhale that, you're toning the left hemisphere of the pelvic floor. Just from the left upper inner thigh in towards the center line of the pelvic floor. We're kind of widening the right hemisphere on the inhale. This is called the front leg in this pose. And toning the left hemisphere during the exhale. You could have the sense that during the exhale, the left sitting bone becomes interested in the right sitting bone. Now we're going to change the position slightly. Bring your right forearm down to your right thigh. Let the pelvis actually tip a bit, right? You brought your torso over, so the pelvis does also tip some, a little bit like a tea kettle. And now on the inhale, keep the tailbone grounded, please, like you're doing cat pose. And on the inhale, try to sense that you can breathe into the back hemisphere of the pelvic floor. You're not going to flare the sitting bones, you're not sending the tailbone back, but just try to sense you could nourish the back hemisphere of the pelvic floor. And let's imagine that that line, you could trace it from the inside of your right heel, the inseam of your right leg, kind of across the section of the pelvic floor to the inseam of your left heel. And on the exhale, gently tone the front hemisphere of your pelvic floor, but do that consistently, slowly, consistently drawing up the front line of your torso. Sweep your left arm past your left ear. And once more, keep the bones of your legs stable, the muscles are stable, but inhale to the back hemisphere of the pelvic floor and sense that that could include from heel to heel, inner thigh to inner thigh, into the back of the pelvic floor. Then the exhale from the front hemisphere of your pelvic floor. Float your left arm up, press your right heel down, and let's go to the other side. So turn your left foot, take the right heel just slightly out, and bend your left knee, warrior two. There you go, good. So where you are here now, your pelvis, we hope it's relatively level. It's not 180, it's not facing straight onto your camera, it does have an angle. You can place your hands at the top of your thigh bones. Put your mind down into your pelvic floor. On the inhale, imagine widening the left hemisphere of the pelvic floor. So you're sending your left sitting bone towards your left knee. And then imagine toning the right hemisphere of the pelvic floor. So the upper inner right thigh and the right sitting bone becomes interested in the left sitting bone. Let's do that again. One more breath cycle. Now you are going to tip the pelvis here. So if the pelvis is upright, rotate your pelvis so that your left elbow comes down to your left knee. And now we're going to focus front to back pelvic floor. So inhale, keeping the pelvis toned, right? So you do have this kind of cat pose tilt to the spine. The tailbone is rooted towards your right heel, but let the inhale come in to touch the back of the pelvic floor, the base of the sacrum. And then exhale from the front hemisphere of the pelvic floor, including the lift of the deep low belly just above your pubic bone. You can take your right arm past your right ear. I know this is a really specific focus, and I want to encourage you again to think of it as not only physical health, but also mental health.
One more time, and let's try this next time. We're going to exhale to rise up. So you press down into your left heel, rise up, and then make your feet parallel. Come down to Prasarita Padottanasana, the standing wide leg forward bend. Place your fingers on the floor or your flat palms. Inhale to the back hemisphere of the pelvic floor here. So the sitting bones and the tailbone might flare apart a little bit. And then exhale and tone from the front hemisphere of your pelvic floor. Then place your hands and step into downward facing dog pose. Walk your feet back until they're hip distance apart. And try it once more here. The inhale is the back hemisphere of the pelvic floor. And exhale in the front hemisphere. Then roll yourself forward to table pose. Take your block. Please sit on it once more. You can place your hands on your hips. You make an anterior tilt of the spine. So we're going to inhale to roll the pelvis forward. This is like a cow pose tilt. And then exhale, start toning the front of your pelvic floor until you have your pelvis just up to neutral. Don't squeeze the back of the tailbone. Don't squeeze the back of the pelvic floor, please. Notice what's happening at the deep low belly. Try that again. Inhale to roll your pelvis forward. And exhale, use the front hemisphere of your pelvic floor to roll into neutral with your pelvis. Rest your hands on your thighs. And see if amidst what's happening physiologically, is it possible there's a mental quiet? Bring your blanket roll back into position, please. Place your toes up on your blanket roll. Uttanasana. When you come into this Uttanasana, place your feet so they're hip distance apart. And let's concentrate on the inhale to broaden the back hemisphere of the pelvic floor here. And with the exhale, the front hemisphere of the pelvic floor tones. And do that again. Inhale to broaden the back hemisphere of your pelvic floor. And exhale, try to connect with the front hemisphere of the pelvic floor. Draw the pubic bone and the sitting bones towards each other gently. Release to the inhale smoothly so you have this gentle cadence between inhale and exhale. And walk forward over your blanket and come down to your squat. When you come down to your squat, reach your arms forward. Let the hips get heavy. And sense the shape of the pelvic floor when you're squatting, because it is different. See if the inhale is welcomed into the pelvic floor at all, and if possible, is it welcome to the back hemisphere of the pelvic floor? And then scooch forward. So you're going to sit on your blanket and come to Baddha Konasana. Put the soles of the feet together. Lift up through your heart. Yeah. And then the pelvis brings you forward, not the chin, but the pelvis. So slide your pubic bone down. Inner thighs can roll down. Slide your sitting bones back. Let the tailbone go back. And see if the inhale can be welcomed to the back hemisphere of the pelvic floor here. And the exhale, could you gently tone the front hemisphere of the pelvic floor? And then please rise up to sitting and reach. You're going to need your blanket roll and your yoga strap. Okay, so, and a block. So what we do, and the straps might feel disappointed to see how they're being used because it's not like dramatic. It's not melodramatic. Sit in front of your blanket, please. Take your yoga strap. And what you're going to do is we place a block between the feet like this. And we take the block to help hold the feet so that the legs are parallel, right? And then you're going to lie backwards. We'll be more, I don't know, we can use the straps in a more celebratory manner tomorrow or some other day. But once you do lie down, then take the top of your blanket right here, make a little curl for your neck. And put your attention down here in the pelvis, right? In the pelvic bowl, what I've been calling the pelvic basin. So we set your thigh bones by setting your feet, your strap, and your block. We set your thigh bones into neutral. I'm going to ask you to concentrate, and I know this might seem odd, and you're certainly welcome to speak to me about it, at the end when we have our class debrief. Concentrate at the back hemisphere of the pelvic floor. Can you release any unnecessary tension there? Can you just, consistently consider softening, softening, softening the back hemisphere of the pelvic floor? You may not even know that you've had tension there. It is entirely possible that you didn't know. But somewhere in your nervous system, your body has known this. So just focusing right there at the tailbone and the place between the two sitting bones. Using the most loving version of yourself, as if you were speaking again to the infant self that is dependent upon how the world cares for it. Invite there to be some reassurance, some ease. From the most loving part of yourself to any part of the pelvis, pelvic floor, tailbone that holds tension, you can say, in this moment, you're safe enough. We're here together. As you imagine this place in your body becoming more deeply relaxed, invite your mind to do the same. From the most loving part of yourself to this place of tremendous potency, subtlety, and intimacy. And offer reassurance. Imagine the space between your sitting bones and your tailbone. Releasing, releasing, gently releasing. As a result of this release, allow your legs to start getting heavier, more deeply grounded. From the back of your sitting bones, the back of your thighs, the backs of your calves, the back of the center of the heels. Continue with this in your imagination for a couple moments more. Deeply releasing the history and the habit of holding the tension. And notice in the process of that release, what now is the quality of your mind? The quality of your mind that has been tending to this process. And I'm going to ask you now to connect to the most wise inward version of yourself and to sense we were born into dependence upon others to care. And the plight of our world right now, we are dependent on each other coming into greater capacity for care, for respect and reciprocity. So to some extent, you may be revisiting tension patterns in your body that are older than the present moment, patterns that are older than this week or this month, even patterns that existed before your lifetime in our society, our civilization. So in this way, you're doing work that is very brave and also very necessary. I'm going to ask you to release the curl of the blanket under your head. Loosen your feet from your strap. You need some foot dexterity for that. As you roll to your right side, let your knees come up towards your chest like you're in the fetal position. And ask your most wise self to help you with the question, how might you increase the assurance that you need right now from you to you? What self-care action, what self-nourishment might you need to increase or to adopt in your life so that your groundedness or resilience, your sense of being cared for is more thorough? And you can press yourself back up to sitting. When you come up to your seat, go ahead and establish your seat to be steady for a few moments, please. And see if there's the possibility that a place in the mind might actually be deeply quiet with what you've offered to the pelvic floor. It's possible that one of the radio broadcasts in your mind has gone down in volume. It's also possible that you have a greater connection to the larger wisdom, which is magnetically pulling all of us to come back home. And then to bring that wisdom into the communities of care that we need to nourish right now. And join your hands together at your heart and try to sense the family of humanity that you hold in your heart, in your good wishes. And you can sense the dozens of others who are also practicing with you right now. Om Asatoma Sadgamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Om Shanti Shanti Shanti
Hari Om. Shri Guru Pyo Namaha. Hari Om. Thank you very much, everyone, and thank you also to your pelvic floors for being willing. Namaste.